Hi guys! In this video, I'm going to show you how to make this knit dress. There are two versions you can make. If you don't want the sleeves, you can just ignore the last part of the video. I used 3 colors and made the dress striped, but of course you don't have to, you can just use one color, and this distressed stitch is optional as well. I knitted a swatch to check the gauge. With this yarn and needles, every 8 stitches is about 6 centimeters. The widest part of my hips is 94 centimeters, and I'll need about 124 stitches to get to 94 centimeters. I started from the bottom of the dress, so I wanted to use a stretchy cast-on rather than long tail cast-on, which is not stretchy. So with the slip knot on my needle, I used my thumb to twist the yarn and insert like this, so I can place a loop on the needle. Now I have 2 loops on my needle. I continued doing this until I have 124 stitches because I worked in the round, and the 124 stitches should be enough to go around my body. Before I joined in the round, I made sure my stitches are not twisted. So all the bumpy side of the stitches are all facing the same direction. Then form a circle with the 2 needles, with all the bumpy side of the stitches pointing towards the center of the circle. I'm right-handed, so the working yarn should be on the right. Also, my yarn needs to be at the back side because I'm going to be working with the knit stitches next. So starting from the first stitch, I knitted every stitch of the first round. I have a very detailed tutorial on how to do the knit stitch if you don't know how to do that. I'll link it in the top right corner. I placed a stitch marker right before the first stitch, so I'll know where the beginning of the round is. So I just knitted every single stitch of the round until I came back to the stitch marker. When I got to the stitch marker, I just slipped it onto the right needle. The second round, I just did purl stitches. To do a purl stitch, I need to bring yarn to the front and purl. Again, I linked the tutorial on the purl stitch if you need it. So I purled every stitch of the round until I'm back to the stitch marker again. Then I repeated those 2 rounds again, 1 round of knit and 1 round of purl. So the first 4 rounds is the edge of the dress. I wanted it to stand out a bit more, so I used very bright color and also alternated between knit and purl rounds to give it this kind of texture. Then after that, I changed to pink and just started doing knit rounds. I changed the color pretty randomly, but I always change at the beginning of the round, which is where the stitch marker is. I use a new color, knit a few stitches, And then I tie the two colors together on the wrong side to make sure the stitches don't come loose. I didn't really plan the color pattern until later. At this point, I'm just working the colors according to how I feel. To make it more interesting, I also made some distressed stitches. To make the distressed stitch, bring yarn to the front to yarn over. And then the next round, knit this yarn over as usual. And then you would have a hole here. After you reach the height you want the distressed stitch to be, find a stitch that is in the same column as the yarn over. Drop the stitch from the needle. And then you got your distressed stitch. Go ahead and knit the next stitch. I did this at the end of the round, which is gonna be one side of the dress, but you can do this anywhere on the dress. So I continued working in rounds until it reaches my hips. I want this dress to be pretty short, just above my thighs. I want to do a bit shaping, so around my waist it can fit tightly. If I don't do any decreasing, it would fit my hips but would be loose around my waist. So I did the decreasing on each side of the dress, which is one in the middle of the round and the other one at the end of the round. The decrease stitch I used is called S2KP or S2KPO. The first one I did is at the end of the round when I have 2 stitches before the marker. I slip the next 2 stitches together knitwise. Knit the next stitch. And then pass the 2 slipped stitches over that knit stitch. So this is one side of the dress. On the other side, I need to do the S2KP one more time. So I counted the stitches. With the stitch I just did being the center one, I found the center stitch on the opposite side. I hope it makes sense. I actually have 2 center stitches, so I just picked either one as the center and marked it with a marker. When I knit to 1 stitch before the marker, I did the S2KP decrease again. So I knit to the beginning of the round, which was easy for me to find because I have a distressed stitch here. With the decreased stitch in the middle, I did the S2KP decrease over these 3 stitches. So I continued doing this for every round, and the decrease forms this kind of pattern on the sides of the dress. Once I reached the waist, I stopped decreasing. I just knitted every stitch working in rounds. At the waistline, I experimented with a different color pattern, switching color every stitch, because I wanted to make it stand out more compared to the rest of the stripes, so it can define the waistline better. And after that, I continued working more rounds until I reached the underarm. Then, to create the armhole, I used stitch markers to split the stitches in half and work them separately into a front panel and a back panel. I didn't want to make it more complicated by working a neckline for the front panel, so I decided to work the front and back panels in the same way. I worked back and forth between the 2 stitch markers, beginning with a knit row. When I reached the other stitch marker, I just turned and started a purl row. The other half of the stitches, I just left them on the needle for now. So I alternated between a knit and a purl row and continued working the panel until it reaches my shoulder. If, like me, you're not good at counting rows, remember how many rows you've done for the first panel, so you can later match up the row count of the second panel with it. Initially, I did 40 rows, which is around 9 inches after splitting the panels. But when I put on the dress, the waistline is not sitting where I imagined it would, where I wanted it to be. It's a bit low on my waist and it's not very flattering. I should have done less rows, so I decided to remove a few rows on the chest area. I removed about 10 rows by stitching the row above and below it together. So it actually is 30 rows from the underarm to shoulder. And now it looks perfect, just as I want it to be. To cast off the stitches, I just knit to 2 stitches on my working needle and then pull the first loop over the second one. Knit one more so I have 2 stitches again, and then cast off the first one. Leave some length when cutting the yarn to sew up the shoulder later. I did my second panel in the same way, knit one row, turn, and purl the next row. Then I need to sew the 2 panels together. Initially, I wanted a smaller neckline, just a simple round neck, but then I thought, since I didn't do any shaping for the front panel, it looked more natural with a boat neckline. And to achieve that, all I need to do is sew up just a few stitches on each side of the shoulder. So I just went in the top 2 loops of a stitch and used the mattress stitch to sew the edges together. Then I hid the yarn tail on the wrong side of the dress. Initially, I was gonna make this dress sleeveless, but you guys voted for long sleeves. So to add sleeves, I just picked up stitches around the armhole beginning from the underarm. First, I worked the sleeve in rows as a panel, and then sewed up the seam under the arm. So I started from this loop on the edge, insert my needle in the space to its left, which is between the first and the second columns of stitches. Pick up a loop, and then go past the bar and move up into the next space, pick up a second loop, and a third loop from the next space. So after 3 loops, I skip the very next space and then repeat again, starting from the space after. So that's 3 loops from every 4 spaces. This round counts as a knit round, so when I got to the underarm, I turned and worked in purl stitches in the other direction. Then I turn again and work in knits. So just 1 knit row, 1 purl row, repeat just like the front and the back panels. The first few rounds is a bit hard to work because the beginning and the end of the row is at one spot, so I had to move the stitches around a lot, but as I worked more rows, it started to work out faster. The last 4 rows is just knit rows to match up the bottom edge of the dress, and then cast off the stitches like before. I sewed up the sleeve seam from the cuff from the right side of the dress. This is kind of like how we picked up the stitches around the armhole, but I just catch the bar between the first and the second columns and pull yarn through. And then go back to where the yarn is coming out of and do the same thing. Repeat all the way to the armpit.